Folks, welcome. Welcome to Law TV, the channel dedicated to instruct you, to make you more aware of our laws. With us today, we have Paul Levin. He's from the prestigious law firm of Levin, Rojas, Camasur, and Rec. Welcome again.
Thank you, Eno.
Thank you for being here, Paul. We're going to go straight to the questions because that's what people want to know. I mean, we're going to make this entertaining, and a lot of us have a lot of questions about law. Let's start with the criminal justice system, the criminal justice process. Could you more or less tell our folks the process in the criminal justice from arrest to trial to then finally the sentencing?
It's a wonderful thing that we have a process, isn't it? Can you imagine living in a country where you basically don't have that? And, so process here, and I should say that my partner in the Levin, Rojas, Camasur, and Rec, former federal prosecutor, massive background with the Justice Department before going into private practice. In a few short years, probably tried more cases than most trial lawyers, or people who call themselves trial lawyers. Should probably be taking questions that get into the weeds, really deep subject matter, because the whole purpose of the Law Channel is to make sure that the people are getting their information not from spectator sportsmen, but actually people who are doing it in the trenches. So I'm not one that does that in the trenches of criminal law in any event. Although I recommend for every young lawyer to at least spend a little bit of time doing that, because it really gives you a good perspective on the value that a lawyer can bring to a family member. You know, the family now has their member back in their family instead of in some prison rotting away somewhere. But to your question, so we have a constitution, obviously, in this country. The country was founded by lawyers who created that constitution. They were founded by a lot more than lawyers, but the lawyers really helped them figure out what it is that they could do to create this balance, these checks and balances in the system that allows for people who are accused of something to defend themselves, and to do it in a way that it's not a foregone conclusion that they're going to lose. Because if the government accuses you of something, whether it's the state or federal authorities, they have more resources, they have investigators that already are on payroll, they have access to labs and information, they have massive machinery compared to you, who very often is just a private citizen that doesn't have a gazillion dollars. So the lawyer, together with the Constitution, can follow the processes. So from arrest, you have the right to remain silent. I think everybody knows that. Mm-hmm. You have the right not to incriminate yourself in a confession and give a confession. You have the right to confront your witnesses later on if there are witnesses that are claiming that you did something wrong. So from arrest, you have the right to plead guilty or not guilty. You could admit fault or guilt. You usually would like to do that after consideration of some of the evidence against you. A lawyer that you hire can get access to your file, to the criminal police report, to maybe some background facts, and understand what it is that they're dealing with. And the lawyer would hopefully have a relationship with the state's attorneys or the federal prosecutors so that they can somewhat get the background context of what's going after. Are they a small person in a bigger puzzle, or are they the main act here? So they have the right to take a case to trial. They have the right not to stay in jail while the case is pending in court for who knows how long it's going to be. They have the right to request bail if they're going to be held on bail because it's a serious enough crime.
Who sets up the bail?
Well, the prosecution will typically demand it, and the court or the judge will determine whether or not it's appropriate, and if so, at what amount.
Okay. Now, you mentioned the Constitution, and immediately a thought came to mind. For the mothers and fathers of the hundreds, maybe more, of African Americans who were lynched in the South, the constitutional rights were non-existent in some cases. Am I right in saying that?
I agree so. Yeah, I think the laws are always interpreted and refracted through the administrative machinery, which necessarily means the political and philosophical views of the people who are, maneuvering that machinery. And what we look back now and say, how the hell could they have done that? It's the same Constitution that we had 200 some odd years ago. But the reality is, the way they interpreted it, or the way they applied it. So you can have a bad interpretation, which excludes proper protections, or you can apply it so that you don't equally give everybody the proper protection. Lawyers were just as important then as they are now. Of course, they were somewhat powerless to defend the rights that the people who were interpreting it said you didn't have.
Would you say that some of these lynchings took place because the folks who were making the laws or were members of the juries were totally against the person that was being tried, or disliked the person that was being tried?
I think there's a tremendous, just like people a lot of times just believe their doctors because they're their doctors. I think sometimes they believe the government or the agencies that are accusing people. Why would they accuse them if it's not true? So I think it's not always a fair. You don't start at zero, like 0 to 100, and everybody starts at zero. That's the idea, but I don't know that that's true. I think sometimes it's not, and I do think that if you have people that are living in an area and they have a certain population and a certain viewpoint, and you don't fit into that category, like you're different background, different color, different religion,
Different accent.
You're not starting at zero. You're starting -10. If it's supposed to be 0, 0, everybody starts. You're probably negative.
Okay. On the other hand, would you say that this is possible in a trial? I've seen hung juries before where I was convinced that the only reason why this person got away with what he did or she did is because some members of the jury identified more with the criminal than with the state or the law. Would you say that that's true also?
I no doubt. There's no doubt that people are going to be influenced by their relationships or their perceived relationships with the people that are being accused. There's jury instructions which prohibit and tell the jurors to not to personalize it, to not do any outside research, to only decide the case on the basis of the evidence that's in the court. If you have an opinion that's different, what the law is or should be than what the judge tells you it is, you have to swear that you're not going to go with your own opinion. You're going to listen to what the judge says. But you can tell people anything you want to tell them. There's still going to be people. And, there's a certain mentality. I mean, Americans, we try to do the right thing. People try to do what they think is the right thing. And if they think the charges are nonsense, or there's a political motive, or it's specious in some way, it's going to be very hard to convince people to not let that enter into their mind during deliberations. The good thing about the jury system is that in that room, people can say things that are inappropriate, and then another person can say, that's inappropriate, that's against the law, that's not the instruction. And listen, we're trying to abide by the law here. If we all start making up our own laws and applying them the way we want to, then we don't really have a law system. We have a social system of justice.
Mr. Levine, I'll tell you, I gotta say that it's great as an interviewer to ask a question to a person who's so well versed, and you make it so clear. Really appreciate that. My next question is, what happens in a situation where, and this happens in political cases that have to do with a bunch of things, where the defense attorney will say, well, my client is not going to be tried in a fair manner here in this county or in this state. Who makes the decision of moving the trial from one state to another, from one county to another? Is that the judge? Is that a group of lawyers? Who makes that decision?
It's the judge, but judges they try to make decisions that are fair and comport with the laws. They understand them. The good thing is that sometimes you need a judge to review a judge's decision. So talking about the process, we have appellate rights, but it is not a personal decision. Generally speaking, where you're charged is going to be proper venue. Where the crime was committed is going to be the proper venue. But there are, I guess, unusual circumstances where one could understand it might be very difficult to get people that have never heard of you, that don't have a predetermined idea of whether you did it or you didn't do it. And you probably don't want those people on your jury.
Right. Now, how often can a judge, or does a judge say, yes, he's right. What he says makes sense. Let's move it to a more fair scenario.
It's highly discretionary. The judges are generally relied on, and it's a very high burden or standard to overturn a judge's decision on moving venue. So you really want to bring your best arguments to court, which basically means you want to bring your best lawyer to court.
Okay. Okay. We all heard of the good cop, bad cop situation. Usually happens to young kids. They put them in a room. They tell them, look, if you don't talk now, we're going to give you life. Or we're going to maybe end your life. You better tell us all the truth. But what after all the rights are read to an accused person, is that true that everything you say can be used against you in a court of law?
It's as if it was a recording that never goes away and you put it on the internet. It's very, very hard to take back something you said.
Uh-huh. Okay, so the advice is keep your mouth shut.
You have rights, but if you don't use them, it's as if you don't have them. So if you start talking before you have an opportunity to confer with your lawyer, and you make admissions or damaging statements, or you give them a basis to go request a search warrant or something of that nature because of something you said, so that machinery starts to work even before your lawyer, if you get a lawyer, is appointed to you or you hire one, and they're rolling. Again, this is a very powerful entity against you, and your best choice here is to say nothing until you've been guided as to what your options are.
Okay, listen to this question. And you folks listen because you have probably made this mistake. I'm driving down the road. I have a little fender bender. Okay, somebody's neck is hurting in the car in front of me. I get out of the car because I know it was my fault. And I tell the other driver, I'm sorry I hit you. Can they prove just by that phrase alone that if he is sorry means he's guilty?
Right. So proof in the criminal context is obviously going to be different in the civil context. But I'm sorry, unless there's like legislation, and there is legislation. For example, doctors can apologize to patients, and that cannot be used in certain states that have adopted this law as an admission of guilt or acknowledgement of guilt. But in a context that you've just described it, involving a car accident, I'm sorry sounds a lot like it's damn my fault, doesn't it?
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, it does. It's my fault. So you should also keep your mouth shut in an
The
accident.
correct question might be, are you okay?
Are you okay?
Do you need
okay?
medical attention?
That's right. Never say you're sorry. Never say I'm sorry, no matter how bad you feel. Right. Let's go into another situation where mistakes have been made, and we all know cases like Charlie Manson, Ted Bundy. With Ted Bundy representing himself in court, and I don't know if he was an attorney or not, but that's not a good advice, is it?
Well, you know what they say. The person who represents themselves has a fool for a client. There's logic behind that,
Okay.
right?
Okay.
So you shouldn't do that because you're emotionally connected with it. You probably don't have the proper background and training in any event to know how to navigate. Lawyers exist for a reason. Doctors exist for a reason. We don't typically perform medical procedures on ourselves, and even if we are doctors, if we have family members, doctors usually don't operate or do anything significant on their family members. They usually trust a colleague to do it, not because they wouldn't necessarily know what to do, but because they want an objective, neutral, competent person who's just making the best scientific decision for their family member or their friend, not themselves. People should not represent themselves. By the way, if you choose not to get a lawyer, you're representing yourself.
Okay.
Aren't you?
So yeah, sure. If I said I don't need an attorney, that means that I am the one who's going to be answering.
Sitting in there and talking with the state's attorney in a very informal environment, just like it might be sitting in a police headquarters, talking with a detective that said something like, "If you didn't do anything wrong, you have nothing to worry about. Talk to me. I'll see what I can do for you."
Although there are folks who say that it's better to represent oneself than to have an inexperienced lawyer like a public defendant, and this happens all the time, right? To represent them in court. You all heard in movies and in television shows, if you cannot afford an attorney, one will be provided to you by the state. Usually, the attorneys provided by the state are not the most competent one. Am I right there?
I wouldn't agree with that. They do it because first of all, many of the younger defense public defenders, they're honing their craft. They're building their skill sets, and they care about it. They chose to be lawyers, and they chose to defend. The problem for them oftentimes is their caseload is too high. They don't have enough bandwidth or time to devote. Maybe they don't have a budget to get the right investigators. Maybe they don't have the awareness that a private person, a private attorney that you're going to hire and spend money on, and you're going to say, my freedom is very important to me, my reputation is very important to me. I didn't do anything here. At least I didn't do what they said that I did. And I want you to find a way to vindicate me or a track that is better than what they're offering me now, or what they're probably going to offer me based on what they think they have as evidence. That lawyer might spend more time, be more creative, and you may actually get a better lawyer by hiring a private attorney. But I wouldn't paint the broad brush and say that they're all better attorneys. You very well could have a better public defender than you could a private attorney. A lot comes down to the individual's capacity, their background. In general, if I was a criminal defendant, I would probably want to pick my own lawyer, just like I'd want to pick my own doctor if I was sick. I just think it's a sense that you're having a little bit more to do with the outcome of your, of your destiny than, you got a great public defender, you got one who really is cynical, doesn't have time for you. You just don't know who you're going to get, do you?
Mr. Levin, you were probably a young man when this happened, but I know you know about the case. O.J. Simpson. Let's take the case of O.J. Simpson for a minute. And there are people who swear today that will put their hands on the Bible and say, he did it. He was guilty. He just had a dream team of lawyers, Johnny Cochran and the rest, who got him out of jail. Because to this date, nobody knows who killed Nicole Simpson. There's not even another suspect out there. You as an attorney, do you think that's true? Do you think that he got away because he had the best lawyers available?
So I was, as a lawyer, respecting the jury system, and I can have an opinion, obviously, just like anybody else can, but I wouldn't substitute my judgment or my opinion, which is probably less informed than the people who actually were in the courtroom and hearing the evidence, to presume that I know better than anybody else. What I will say is I completely agree with your observation, which is, dream team or not, a good lawyer will win cases that sometimes a bad lawyer will lose. A great lawyer will sometimes win cases that even a good lawyer would lose. So the better the lawyer, and everything that goes with that, because you could have a great lawyer in one category who's not a great lawyer in another category. So you really need to find a good match. I think lawyering is kind of like a football analogy. It's a quarterback. So if you have a really good quarterback, who are the teams that go to Super Bowls? They're usually ones with pretty good quarterbacks.
Of course.
So you definitely want a good quarterback on your team.
We had one with the Jets, but he played 72 seconds. Anyway, Mr. Levin, talking about that, let's keep on that subject because that's very interesting, and this will help you guys too. How do you pick a right lawyer? Is there a record that anybody keeps, the courts, or how do I find the best lawyer for a criminal case?
Well, see, that's one of the reasons why the Law Channel makes so much sense. Because now you can get an environment where, the next show that we're going to be doing criminal law, hopefully, will actually have a legal expert on criminal law, and somebody that you might want to hire to do your case. And if not, say that you're in a different part of the country, but you really like that lawyer who's practicing in Minnesota or New York or Connecticut, I bet you that lawyer knows another great lawyer where you live. So where do you find your best restaurants and your best vacations and your best recommendations? Well, you usually find it from people whose judgment you believe is similar enough to your own that that's going to be a meaningful recommendation. So if you've got a good source of recommendation for a good lawyer, go with it. Now, you often won't because in the criminal law context, you're probably not going to have too many friends that have needed great criminal lawyers or family members. So now you don't have that. So what are your alternatives? Probably not buses, billboards, and websites that all are going to be saying the same thing. Look at the cases I've won. Look at the results. I have the best reputation. Maybe showing the pictures of their staff. So there is a dearth of information and accessibility when you need it. So that's part of the reason behind the Law Channel.
Okay, when they say a lawyer is appointed to you if you cannot afford one, I can say, well, you got to assign a lawyer to me because the one that I want to have, I can't afford them. What do they base that determination on to assign a lawyer to somebody? Because obviously, if you have a bank account with $5,000, maybe you can't afford the best lawyer in town, but you can afford a lawyer. So where is the line drawn?
Great question. So, look, constitutionally, you have a right to be presumed innocent before, until you're proven guilty. You have a right to defend yourself and to appear in court and to have a jury of your peers determine that you're guilty or innocence. But if you don't have a lawyer, all those rights are pretty much meaningless. So the Constitution puts the onus or the burden on the state actor to provide you a lawyer. Now, it doesn't say they have to provide you the best lawyer. It doesn't say they have to provide you a lawyer of your choice. They have to provide you with a lawyer. And what they've done is they've created a system of public defenders, typically, who are versed in this law, who understand the system, who will at least do better than you would yourself. Look, you have the right to hire private counsel, but society can't, afford, I guess, it comes down to a social and economic concern. Mm-hmm. If everybody was going to hire their own lawyer and have the right to whatever the expense is, it's going to cost a lot more. And I just don't think that is politically feasible. And they didn't need to go there. They just basically needed to make sure that people have actual representation. Okay. And that's about as far as they've been able to take it.
Okay, before you go, and it's been wonderful to have you here. Before you go, one of our viewers sent in a question earlier today. The difference between murder 1 and murder 2. Premeditated murder, and what does that mean for the person out there like me also who don't know this too clearly? Could you describe that for us?
So it sounds like a law school question, which I've had 30-something years ago, because it's been decades since we had our criminal case. And my cousin was a DA in New York, and he was assigned to the major crimes, and he was doing murder cases. So I have a perspective based on sort of chit-chat that we had around the family table. Otherwise, I'd have to resort to a okay. refresher course. But as I recall, the question is premeditation. If you decided in advance that you're going to kill this person, and then you committed the act, I believe that would be probably a murder 1, carries a higher level of penalty. Mm. If, on the other hand, there were passions, somebody caught somebody with somebody's wife or girlfriend, and anybody can understand being really pissed.
Yeah,
but
sure.
If you kill them in that context,
lost my mind,
and that's a different issue. Losing your mind goes to competency and insanity, and it's a defense actually. But it's a concept that you didn't plan it out. In the quietness of cool-headedness, blood not boiling, you actually realized a plan that you were going to commit this heinous crime, knowing full well what you were taught in school and what you've learned, and you still did it. Yeah. Okay, that's different than somebody that makes a really bad decision based on human emotions getting the better of them at that moment and killed them. And then there's another one where maybe you didn't even intend to kill them. You lost your emotions and you struck them and you hit them in the brain, in the side of the head, and they fell down and died. Now, you didn't intend to kill them, so it's not really murder, is it? But yet you killed them. Right. So what is that? So I think that's called manslaughter.
Okay. Ladies and gentlemen, we've been listening to an expert in law, Paul Levin. Thank you so much for being here. And you out there, thank you so much for enjoying our program today. And viewing, and hopefully you learn something like we're going to do in the future with different programs in Law TV. Thank you so much for being with us.